the students in La Cocina. I'm Michelle Hicks, and I'll be cooking with you today. We're going to be making miyeokguk, which is a traditional Korean stew. Myeok is seaweed, and guk is like the name for stew. And so this dish is really important to me and really important to like Korean culture overall. And it's relatively really easy to make. But so this soup is really important just because it kind of like signifies life in a way, because it's traditionally given to mothers after they give birth. Because it's like rich with nutrients, it's rich with iron, which you lose a lot of iron in childbirth. But then afterwards it's given to kids every day or every birthday, so that way you can remember the struggle of your mom giving birth to you. You can remember like your heritage, you can remember all those things. And so for me it's a really important dish just because I ate this all the time growing up on my birthday. And it's also something that's very cheap, and so when my family was in those situations where we didn't have a ton of money, like it was something that I loved and something that I attached with good memories. So it was my mom's way of like tricking me into being like, oh, like we have it, like we're gonna be fine, like this is all okay, and like it's associated with the good things. And so first thing we do is cut the green onions, and so you kind of just cut like a good amount, like 3 or 4. But so I always used to get really frustrated whenever my mom would not give me like recipes, because I was like, well, Mom, like how am I going to cook them? Like how am I going to like pass on these recipes? Like how am I going to like make them when I go away from you in college? And she was like, well, you've seen it all growing up. You kind of just know. And I remember being so frustrated because I was like, well, where are like the 3 tablespoons of like garlic, or where are the 3 tablespoons of like kukanjang, or like where are the 3 tablespoons of this, or something like that. Like I wanted a concrete formula I could like hold and touch. But she was like, that's just not how ethnic cooking works. But yeah, and so this is something my mom used to make all the time, especially on my birthdays. And when I was a kid, like all my aunties used to come over, and they used to like cook for us on our birthdays. And I thought it was interesting that like every time they came over, we would never cook food. They would always be the one who were like bringing food, and like me, and like kind of helping us in that way. But yeah. And especially because it's polite in Korean culture to bring something to the person's house that you're going to. And so I remember it being super weird when I like visit my white friends, and my mom was like, oh, bring an orchid, or like bring this flower. And I was like, Mom, they never bring us anything. And she was like, well, that's just bad manners. But yeah. And so as you can probably tell, my mom plays like a really big role in my life, and like a big role in cooking. Because she was one of the people who like really raised me and really like made it important that like culture, no matter what people are going to say, no matter what people are going to do, is something really important and something that you have to like keep alive. And so she kind of did that through food, through yelling at me in our native language when I was kind of unresistant to that. And yeah. And so she was also one of the people who really raised me after my dad died. And so as a result, I like really grew up with like a lot of Korean culture. I grew up with the aunties yelling at me. I grew up in that kind of environment. But yeah, now we're peeling garlic, because you put, kind of to prep first, you do the green onion and garlic together, and then you wait for the myeok to continue to absorb the water. And then you cut the beef a little bit. I cheated because I bought some pre-cut beef, but even then you still have to cut it so it's a perfect size. But so that bowl is the dried seaweed, or the myeok, and so my mom always makes a joke of it because it looks really, when it comes it's dried. And so she's always like, be careful how much you cook because you might end up feeding the whole Korean army. Which I didn't realize was a thing until the first time I tried making it on my own. And so I was like, oh, like this doesn't look like that much. Like my mom was like, when she said like 1 handful, she like was kidding. Like we probably could put like a little bit more. And I ended up just cooking so much seaweed because I like didn't trust her measurements or her approximate measurements. And I was like, oh, I totally know. And so approximate measurements are really key, even when they seem completely made up. But yeah, and so that she's gonna like absorb a little bit more. And the great thing about this soup's like ingredients is they usually stay for a really long time. And so Like, it's really good for when you don't have a ton of money because the milk will always stay dried, and so it's something you can always kind of go back to. So it doesn't just have to be a birthday thing, and so something that I realized when I got to college was that I like really missed home, and like I missed that kind of like familial connection, and so when I was sad, I'd like always make it because it's super easy and it's pretty cheap. And it's actually something that could be found in Salem, Oregon, which does not have the most diverse selection of food. I remember coming to college and my mom was like, I haven't seen this many white people since I first got here in the 90s. And so she was like a little bit thrown by that. And so, especially getting dropped off at college, she was like, are you going to be okay? Like, I don't see like our grocery stores here. I don't see like our language. I don't see like the things that we have at home here and the things that like I realized really make my home. And so that was something that I didn't realize how much would affect me in my first year, but it like really ended up doing so. My first year I got to college, I was very like kind of lost a little bit just because I didn't have all those things, and I forgot how much those things like kind of rooted me in a lot of like family values and like kept me driven and going because they really were stuff that's like important to me and stuff that is and stuff that like makes home for me. And so trying to cultivate that like sense of home even when like the resources might not be available to me or when there's only like 4 Koreans on campus has been very interesting. And so yeah, during my first year I like kind of hated living in Salem, Oregon, just because there wasn't that kind of connection. And then I kind of grew to love it the more that I realized I could take my home with me and be able to share it with people and kind of like cultivate that new sense of home. And so that was like a really big part of like me growing up and figuring that out. But I've lived in Salem for 3 years now. And I also, unlike most college students, I stayed here my first summer and my second summer and potentially my third summer, depending on where my job search goes. Yeah, and so I've kind of seen like the ebbs and flow, and like since I've stayed here for so long, I know. Oh, there we go. I know like how interesting things can be, and especially for people when they first get here, because some of the most like rewarding things that I experienced like being a student here is that new students of color, like new students will like ask you questions about like where can I get this, or like how can I I'm gonna cut this first. Or how can I like find these things, and how can I do like kind of what you did in your first year and like cultivate that sense of home. And so that's been kind of cool experience that I didn't think I'd have when I went to college. But now we're going to, this looks like it's almost done absorbing the water because when it comes dried. And so it really takes a little bit to do it, but so I'm gonna cut this first. And so see how the milk is in kind of like long pieces? To make it bite-sized, because really all the soup is just like green onion, garlic, meat, milk, and the gochujang, which is like a Korean soup soy sauce, and so it's a little bit saltier than traditional soy sauce, and it's like, in my opinion, the flavor's a lot more concentrated. And so I remember one time my friend accidentally poured a little bit of that instead of the regular soy sauce and was just like, oh, this is the most salty thing I've ever had, and just like couldn't finish eating. But so all the pieces kind of have to be like bite-sized, and so that's part of the reason why we're going to cut the meat a little bit more and cut this a little bit more. Yeah. But awesome. And so yeah, kind of one of the really cool like rewarding things I get to do as like a older member of this community is I get to like become that like auntie for someone else and like be able to be like, these are where you get your groceries, these are how you can cook in the dorms, or like this is how to hide your rice cooker from your RA. And so that's been really cool, especially because like I grew up with a ton of like really cool like badass aunts who like really like supported my family, especially in hard times, like after my dad died, they were like some of the people who would like pick me up from like school and like help us go to the grocery store and like really like come and support us. And I thought like, and that's been something to kind of do for other people and being that like kind of support system. And so I have two of my favorite aunties, Kyung and Suk, who are awesome. They're old, relatively. Don't ever tell them I said that though. But so they just were kind of, they're my favorite. They're old. They're a little bit crotchety, which I always thought was really funny, just because I don't, like whenever I do something, they'd always be like, "Oh, Michelle, like what? We taught you better. We did this," and so it was kind of funny. But and they're also part of the people that taught me how to cook, and especially since after my dad died, I started doing a lot of the cooking around and started doing a lot of like that kind of like work and care. Oh, there we go. Sorry, it's just kind of a journey to tease apart into like cuttable strips, and I really love it. And so there have been the people too that are really like helping me like learn the culture and like pass it on, because they are in a very similar situation that my mom was in, and so they came to the United States after after they met soldiers abroad in Korea, and so they kind of all had very similar experiences, and so but they all settled in the same area, and so they were able to like talk to each other and be like, "Oh, like I don't understand," and like rant about like their husbands or like different things that they didn't like about their new home, or things that they did love, or like simply like what each other was doing. I remember one of my favorite things like after temple was like everyone like spilling the tea about like, "Oh, did you see that she was wearing this?" or like, "Did you see that like her daughter was doing this?" And so just kind of growing up with that, they were just like really fun to be around. And they're also some like the main people who like helped my mom be happy here, and like helped my mom like even after my dad died, like the one person that she like knew and loved in the United States, like it is part of the reason why she stays here, because sometimes she always jokes about like moving back to Korea one day, just because it's her home. But at the same time, one of the other things they rant about all the time is how much Korea's changed since they left. And so the Korea that they left is not the same Korea that exists now, that like everyone thinks of when they think of like K-pop, when they think of like any of the kind of traditional like high-tech, like high-money things now. Like when my mom left Korea, she didn't really have a ton of money, was working a couple jobs. She was a model, she was a secretary for an ambassador. She just kind of did a little bit of everything here and there. And just because there wasn't a ton of opportunities, not only for her as a woman, but just like in general for everyone, because she left in like the peak of the economic crisis. And so for context, my mom is also kind of old. Don't ever tell her I said that though. And so she was born in 1957. That was like peak post-Korean War, like everything was still changing. Like Korea was in a period of really like intense poverty because there wasn't a ton of money. There wasn't a ton of jobs, and the Korean countryside and everything had just been ravaged. And so my mom was kind of lucky though, because she was from Seoul, which is the capital. And so she had more opportunities than like most people in like rural areas. And so she like really grew up during like the periods of crisis, and so like those were a lot of her formative years. And so I always thought it was really interesting how everything we learned to make was so cheap, and that was just like every like Korean dish we made was so cheap, and that was because just the way that she grew up and like what her family could afford and like what she associates with being Korean is like the ingredients don't cost much just because they couldn't afford that much. And so like she'd be telling me about like some years when they wouldn't have the beef, and so they'd use Spam, and she was like, "I'll never do that again, it was disgusting." And so now she tries to buy like really nice meat to try and kind of make up for those moments. And so And so now we're going to cut the meat into smaller slices. Yeah, anyway, so like the Korea that she left now is not the same Korea that exists, because now, like, luckily enough, like, Korea is in a place of wealth. It's in a place of, like, development. It's in a, frankly, way better place since, like, the rise of the Jibbles and the rise of all these other things. And that helped the Korean economy, and so this wasn't something she ever really, like, shared a lot growing up. I just kind of, like, slowly figured it out as I got older and the more research I did. And so last summer I was really lucky to get a LARC, which is a liberal arts research community where you are able to do research about a sort of predetermined topic that you get faculty guidance from, and so it really is a community. That's how I did mine on Asian. The broader topic was Asian economic development, and how they all transitioned out of this phenomenon called the middle income trap. And I was really lucky enough to be able to investigate Korea that way and be able to get a deeper understanding of its history and its economic past, because that was something that my mom didn't really like to talk about. She didn't really like to talk about, like, struggling growing up. She just wanted to be like, that was then and this is now. And so being able to do that and being able to, like, have those conversations with my mom, like, I understand the economic, like, hardships you all went through, at least, like, in, like, a learning way. And so that was something really cool to be able to, like, connect with my mom about, because she was finally willing to be like, yeah, I grew up, and, like, part of the reason why we don't go camping, or why I thought it was interesting that, like, we never went camping, was because my mom was like, I lived like I was camping for, like, 10 years. Like, why would I ever want to sleep in the dirt again? And so that never really clicked for me, but I was like, wow, like, that is why none of us, like, I've been camping once in my life, and that was with my best friend's family. It wasn't even with mine. And so she just kind of, like, a lot of, like, last summer was getting to know my mom's, like, history and getting to know my mom's past, because it wasn't something that she would, like, readily talk about, would be able to rant about, like, when it was prodded. And so that was really cool, and that's something I'm really thankful for. Oh, no. And yeah. And so if she ever wanted to go back to Korea because of that past, she was like, I know the language, but, like, the culture is completely different. Like, the customs are still the same, but the broader, like, infrastructure, like, plane tickets are really expensive. And yeah, and so there's been a lot of changes, and so that's something that's, like, been kind of a touchy topic, just because she wants to go back because she misses her home and she misses her family, because we still have a ton of family over there. But it's just not something she'd feel comfortable with, I think, because it's just not the same place that she left. And so, yeah. And so that's been something kind of interesting to, like, talk to other people's families about how they, like, either mitigated the fact that their homes are completely different now, but still remain, like, the same. And I think it's a very common thing, especially in Asian families, because a lot of, like, my friends growing up, like, my best friend's mom was, like, a refugee from the Vietnam War. And so she was like, I could never go back, but I, like, but I'd love to. And so, like, kind of that, like, longing for homeland. And so I think last summer, like, being able to do that research and being able to, like, connect with my mom in that way was really helpful for her, and helpful for me, frankly, because like, it's helped me deconstruct a lot of the, like, small things, like going camping, like, that we never did as a kid. And so that's been really cool. And also, ooh, these actually look perfect sized. Ooh. Yeah, and so we're gonna go to the stove now. So now we're gonna cook the meat, and so we usually cook it in the sesame oil. And so it's gonna smell really nice. It always gives, oh, that's not the one. This is the one. Yeah. And so in the beginning, you kind of cook it on high heat. And again, with, like, the lack of recipe thing, you just kind of put enough oil to coat the bottom. It doesn't have to be, there's not necessarily, like, a set amount. You just kind of put a little bit, but not too much. And so being able to, like, learn the recipes and being able to do these things has been really important and fun, and a good way to connect, like, with my history and, like, understanding, like, what my mom went through to get here, and understanding, like, what it means to be Korean, and just because food is so integral to our culture, and a lot of like the simplest things have like really cool histories. And like for example, like kimchi, like the staple Korean dish that you see everywhere, has like a really funny history behind it, just because everyone, it kind of goes back to like Japanese colonization. And when the Japanese came, they were like, oh, we're gonna like hurt these like Koreans, like this is gonna be one way to conquer them, is by giving them this like really spicy pepper that like they can't digest, and it's gonna hurt them so badly. And people ended up just like sticking it on the soup, on the cabbage. And so it became this kind of like resistance food. And so like little simple things like that really do have, they're like big and fun cultural things to it. I'm gonna put some salt and pepper on it now so there's a little bit of flavor. So, yeah. And again, there's not really like a real recipe, it's just kind of do it as you go. Ooh. Yeah. And so you just kind of cook the meaty bits for a little bit on high. And then, ooh, is this hot? No, perfect. And then, ooh, kind of toss the rest in. Oh, the sesame oil always smells so good whenever I'm cooking. Out here, but like I love it. And so I was like, I remember one time my roommate Alexa got home and I was just like crying in the kitchen, like with my headphones in, and Alexa was like, oh my God, are you okay? Like what's going on? And I was like Kim's convenience store, and it like wasn't even like a moment to cry, and it was just like the family moment of like both of them like cooking or something, or like doing something completely normal, and I just started like leaking because just like leaking tears, because I was like, this kind of representation and this kind of like things I never saw growing up, and being able to like see a family who like looked like my extended family and my mom, and seeing that kind of thing was just so powerful. And like I couldn't really like put word to it. I was just kind of like, oh my God, like they're like me. And so it was really cute, and so I just kind of like leaked a little bit. I'm gonna fill this up with water. But Kim's Convenience is also like, it just like showed so many of the things, like the random like things that people won't get, like the implicit pressure to like get married, or like the like the small like slap on the hand or whatever, like that Asian parents do that other people are like, oh my God, like you're abusing your child. Or just like little things like that that are just like so painfully relatable, that I was just kind of like, yes. And part of the thing too, like the girl is like an art student, and so they always like make fun of her, like, oh, are you really like getting a job? Are you really doing this? And like, especially like as a non-STEM like political science student, like having that, like those jokes and everything get made, and like I know it's made out of like a loving place, but I think it's just so funny that like this is something like people were down with. Yeah, I love Kim's Convenience. Also, like the mom is just so like awkwardly stubborn, but like just very much like my mom. And so after adding like the milk and all the other things, you just kind of like let it sit for a little bit and like let it cook, just because seaweed is like really tough, and so if you don't really like cook it like this, then it stays really tough. And so you can always tell like when it's either good or bad depending on like how crunchy the seaweed is. And so this just kind of helps it like soften up and like let the flavor kind of do its thing. Also, I always thought this was like so weird growing up because I was like, no one else eats seaweed, and then I was like, Korea's a peninsula, like everyone eats seaweed. You just kind of let it simmer for a little bit, and then I'm gonna put the soup in it, and or not the soup, the water that becomes a soup, and then you put the gochujang for like flavoring, which is like, you put like 3 or 4 spoonfuls, or just like a good pour, depending on like what access to kitchen utensils you have. I'll probably do a good pour just because when you know, you know. Like, I saw this one like post on the internet that was like, POC families like don't cook with food; they just cook until their ancestors tell them to stop seasoning. And I was like, yeah, like that actually makes really good sense because when I was like, whenever I cook, I think about like, oh, this is like kind of when my mom stopped, or like this is kind of when my aunties stopped. Like it looks good enough. And the flavor still comes out beautifully, and so that's always good. I just like saw that and was like, wow, like, yeah. And so you also just kind of put like a good amount of water in. There's not really like a set amount of water. You just kind of know and know. Oh, you need a little bit more water. It's pretty well known just because most Koreans eat it, and like since it is such like a staple dish of you eat it on your birthday, your mom eats it after you give birth, like I eat it when I'm sad just because it reminds me of my mom and like the things that she went through to like have me here to like make like her version of the American dream possible. And so that's always kind of nice, but a lot of other families eat it, and so even with like the 4 other Korean students that are here, one of the things that like I did with Yeowon, who's a first year, is we made myeokguk soup together on her birthday, and so it was really nice. Yeah, and like just kind of making like everyone knows it just because everyone has it because they were all born. But the recipe kind of varies by family. Like for example, some people don't really put the gochujang; they just kind of put this. My mom was like, don't ever do that just because it tastes like a little bit less salty. And for having high blood pressure and high blood sugar, she still loves the salt. And like all of us really do. The gochujang, it's like the soup soy sauce. So you just kind of put it until you get like a good color in the soup. Oh, you're gonna need a little bit more. Yeah. You pour until your ancestors tell you no. But sometimes they really do tell you no. Like sometimes though when I'm cooking, like do you ever get that implicit feeling of like your aunt being like, no, Michelle, or like, no, Denise? And so sometimes that'll just kind of kick in. And I also like how nothing has like a real recipe, and so you can kind of like make things bigger or smaller, just like depending on like what you're craving. I was like, this is probably bad food plans practice. Oh, that's good. It has enough salt. When you know, you know. My ancestors told me no, and I stopped. But yeah, that's kind of how you cook, and then you let it simmer for like 15-ish minutes. So first it'll get to like a rolling boil, and then you just like turn it down. So that way the flavors can kind of meld together. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. It's ready. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Students in La Cocina. Bye.